Well, hi there. Warm welcome. You're watching Blueprint Exclusive, and I'm Meghna Deka. Well, it's the world's highest peak, and it's witnessed the heights of danger and plunder. Welcome to the Great Everest Scandal, a 20 million insurance loot where the dream of scaling Everest was twisted into a deadly design of deception. The Nepal police have exposed a scam where they say that climbers were not just guided by the Sherpas, they were being secretly drugged. They were being forced to fall sick. Then they were pushed into panic, and then began the emergency helicopter rescues. Well, maybe fake air rescues is a real fraud. From Sherpas to the chopper operators, from hospital staff to the handlers to medical officers as well. It's a full-blown plunder playbook at the peak of heights of scandal. In fact, investigators are claiming that 4,700 foreign climbers have been conned with bogus bills, fabricated flights, forged files. They even sold a dream. However, they delivered danger. Well, tonight we are going to break down the Great Everest scam. Well, this is when it began. Between 2022 and 2025 is what the investigators in Nepal are saying this entire scam was being orchestrated. They managed to cheat, at least so far it appears, they managed to cheat 4,700 climbers into emergency evacuations by playing on the fear psyche. This scam, which has been unearthed so far, is to the worth of $20 million. Let that sink in. Well, this scandal has triggered off a fresh scrutiny of tour operators, guides as the spring climbing season has begun on the 20th of March. Investigators are saying that the scam has spanned across the entire trekking ecosystem, involved Sherpas, trekking firms, helicopter operators, so on and so forth. In fact, so far, there have been arrests also made. Police say that 6 rescue company operators and managers have been arrested on 25 of January for allegedly faking these medical evacuations of foreign tourists to claim insurance money. A total of 32 people have been charged and 11 arrests have been made so far. But how did this entire scam really pan out? Well, let's tell you about how they went from luxury to this rescue operation and fraud. Well, first you had the mountaineers who were sold the dream of climbing the Everest. They were taken to the base camp. The Everest base camp is where this entire scam had broken out. Investigators are saying that the guides used a range of methods to force helicopter evacuations, including faking medical emergencies and lacing food with large amounts of baking powder. Now, this would then simulate gastric distress, commonly associated with altitude sickness. The tourists who were drugged and poisoned by their own Sherpas felt that they were unwell. They were told that they were unwell, and some of them were actually given medicines which were laced with so much amount of water which would trigger off these symptoms, which would seem like height dizziness. After this, the trekkers reported nausea. They were getting dizzy. They would get body aches. They were then advised to descend immediately, which is why, imagine you're at the base camp of Mount Everest. You're being told that you must descend immediately because you have this huge medical emergency. Then immediately the trekkers would agree for very expensive emergency helicopter evacuations. Now remember, all the foreign tourists are going there with travel insurance. And that is where the scam lies. Once the trekker says okay to an emergency helicopter evacuation, authorities say that the operators then used forged medical bills. They made forged flight documents. They claim that there were costs which have been incurred because the trekkers have fallen ill, and these costs were recovered from international travel insurers. So that's how the modus operandi was, which we are explaining to you. But how did they manipulate climbers into thinking that they need emergency evacuation? Well, police have said that the methods including, first, mixing baking soda into the food. This would induce nausea and bloating in the trekkers. At times, they were given excessive amounts of Diamox, which remember is a prescription drug. It is a medicine which helps with acclimatization at high altitudes. However, when they were given this medicine when it was not required, this led to overhydration, which led to symptoms which were quite similar to that of high altitude cerebral edema, which made the trekkers feel that they were not acclimatized at all to the heights. In fact, there were some cases, as per the investigators, where they were even using laxatives. Laxatives, now remember, weakens the trekkers to the point where they couldn't continue so far on foot. So they're then being advised to take emergency evacuation. So once the climbers fall ill, the Sherpas planned this emergency evacuation. What really happens after that? Let's explain that. Once a rescue is triggered off, the operators then inflated the costs by billing each and every passengers. Now, even if all the passengers were taken together in one helicopter, they would say that separate helicopters were used to evacuate each and every one of these trekkers. Now, this even when multiple people were all flying together in one chopper. So those were the fake bills for chopper which were being generated. They were also generating fake flight records. They showed separate chopper bills for each of these, saying that there were independent flights which were going back and forth. Then they forged the medical documents as well, when they used to support the exaggerated insurance claim. Because remember, as all of us know, if you have to make an insurance from a travel insurer, then you have to show the medical bills. So there were fake medical bills also with exaggerated claims, which were then given to the international travel insurers. Then another level of deception came in with the hospitals. The hospitals were also creating false admission and treatment reports. Why? Because in some cases, as per the Nepal police, in some cases, the tourists were not even sick. They were not even receiving care. Their names were taken down and hospitals were actually forging medical bills for these tourists. So there you see, this is a very deep nexus across the entire trekking ecosystem, which is raising eyebrows over safety and insurance fraud in the region. Now, here's the report by the Kathmandu Post. It says, and I'm going to quote it here, that there were Sherpas who were spiking the food, which made the trekkers sick. What were they using? They were using baking soda, raw chicken, even rat droppings. Now, remember, this is a report which came in 2019. But still, till now, 2026, this entire modus operandi still continues. In 2019 itself, you had the Kathmandu Post reporting this, that baking soda was used on trekkers, that they were at times fed raw chicken, undercooked chicken, that there were rat droppings which were mixed into their food, spiked into their food. Then the foreign trekkers, some of the cases, the foreign trekkers also connived with these companies, with their Sherpas and with the tour companies. The trekkers would feign that they have mountain sickness when they didn't have mountain sickness. Then they would seek a emergency evacuation by a chopper because it was covered under their international insurance. Then these trekkers, in return, what did they get in return? They got a cut in the price expeditions. So they paid less for that expedition. They helped the expedition companies by giving them a cut and that bloated insurance claim. In fact, such was the impact of this expose by the Kathmandu Post that at that time foreign insurance firm had also threatened that they are going to stop giving any kind of coverage if there were trekkers who were going to Nepal. Everyone seemed to know that this was happening, and yet it continued since 2019 when it first came to light. So let me go across to two people who are well versed with the Mount Everest, but more importantly, well versed with the mountaineering ecosystem as well. Rupin Dang is joining us. He's the MD of Wilderness Films India Ltd. He's a filmmaker, but also an avid mountaineer. Vamini Sethi is joining us, and mountaineer, well, she's actually climbed to the summit. We'll go to her in just a bit. But Rupin, I'm going to come to you first. You must explain to us this kind of a modus operandi, this kind of an ecosystem would be required, because it's not just one Sherpa who seem to be carrying it out, poisoning the trekkers. You need everyone in this ecosystem to come together. Apparently, they did it for close to a decade.
I think this whole Everest saga this whole, it's a little sordid what's been happening around Everest over the last few decades, because it's a very commercial operation. We've heard lots of, whispered gossip about how a lot of the people who get onto Everest pay their $100,000 to be literally dragged up on Everest, how the fixed ropes have been placed in advance, and people who are not fit are taken up to the summit of Everest. Now, this is all an extension of that sordid commercialization of Everest. And it's a very unfortunate occurrence, because it's going to sully the entire name of mountaineering in Nepal, in India, and the entire Himalayan region. And it's just a very unfortunate occurrence, because it's just very, very commercialized, and it just shows a terrible nexus between the mountaineering guiding community, the expedition organizers, and the hospital. It's just a very, very unfortunate saga that's been going on for years, apparently, and it's not been caught out.
So that is what's most disturbing, that it's been happened. Yes, it's been caught out, but still, they couldn't stop it. But Vamini Sethi, when someone goes to the Everest, even if it is the base camp, there is that fear psyche which were used to con several of these trekkers. What do you feel when you are there? And what if you fall ill? What are the SOPs that any mountaineer would know, but more importantly, any climber would adhere to if you are sick?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Meghna. So I was attempting Everest in 2019, and my team and I were just 500 meters from the summit when we had to turn back because of the bad weather.
Okay.
Now, at that altitude, we are totally dependent on our Sherpas and on our guide to decide on our behalf on what needs to be done. We can't take independent decision. What happened in this case is not just an insurance fraud. This is the breakdown of trust of climbers at higher altitude and playing with people's dream. So, the protocols are very simple. When something happens to you at sea level, you go to the doctor. You figure out what's happened. But when something happens to you at a higher altitude, okay, and if it is more than a headache, because if it's just headache, which means you're acclimatizing. But if you have any symptom which relates to mountain sickness, high altitude mountain sickness, and that can include vomiting, nausea, constant headache, there is no question asked. You have to descend immediately, because then it can progress to life-threatening, impact.
Okay.
You spoke about HACO and HAPO, right? You can have water in your lungs, in your brains. So the only option you're left with is to descend. Now, when you have that fear, you don't have the luxury of going back the way you have come up, because you're climbing up slowly. But when you have to descend because of higher altitude, you have to make it very quick, get to the zone which has oxygen. And that's where, the heli and the chopper evacuation come to play. These are very expensive. If you do not have insurance, it can cost you about 2.5 to 8 lakhs. And any climber with a symptom like that, will be dependent on their Sherpas, on their guide, trusting them in telling them what to do. And in this case, they were forced into these evacuation. I mean, when I heard about this case, the thousands of trekkers have been impacted, about 20 million fraud. It's appalling. It is, people, just to give a little bit of context, what it takes to climb Everest, I spent 55 lakhs for one summit. I did 5 years of training. Okay. And then you have to be away from the family. It's a 2-month climb. If you're doing Everest base camp, it's a 15-day climb, right? So it's a dream climb.
So how much would a 15-day climb, just to get a sense of how much people would have invested into it, also buying insurance? Everyone buys insurance, right?
Yes. So insurance is mandatory when you're going to the top. There is no way that you climb Everest top without an insurance. When you're going to the base camp, it is not mandatory, but no trekking company, no organizer will take you without the insurance.
Right.
So you invest in insurance, okay? And this insurance is also expensive. Now, if I go back to 2019, I paid a couple of lakhs. Now, from then to now, I'm sure the prices have inflated. These insurances are very expensive. And everybody knows if something goes wrong, if they have to pay this kind of sum to come down, which is about 8 lakhs or between 2.5 to 8 lakhs to sort of descend. That's why everybody goes with an insurance. And I think this is what this entire, group played on. Because
so that's the root cause, playing on the psyche of those who are there. It's literally, as you were rightly saying, this is one of the worst breach of trust that you have between a climber and a Sherpa. When that trust is broken with the greed and the scam to this level, imagine what happens when you're at these heights. You've paid a lot of money, you've invested a lot in it, and yet you get scammed in this matter. Rupin Dang as well as Vamini Sethi, thank you so much for joining us here on the show and telling us what it feels like to be at that height and yet to be conned and cheated. Without a short break, don't go anywhere.